Hey all, in this video we're going to be looking at the long run average total cost curves, which is just basically a continuum of what we learned about in our last video, which is the short run ATC. Alright, so pay attention. Rawr.
So long run costs. So remember, there's a difference between long run costs and short run costs. Just like how there's a difference between long run resources and short run resources. And so remember, whenever we're talking about the long run and short run, we're never talking about a specific amount of time, right? We're never going to say the long run is 3 to 5 years or the short run is 6 months or less, right? That it's never going to be a specific amount of time. And so here, right, remember the long run is going to be used for planning by firms to identify which size factor results in the lowest per unit cost. In other words, what the long run is used for is to identify just sort of how many factories they should be making, right? Just how many sort of actual institutions or buildings, right, they should be planning for. And so remember, if we're going back to the beginning, right, the difference between short run and long run is the fact that short run costs and short run resources have at least one fixed cost and one fixed resource. While long run costs, right, all costs are variable. All resources are variable in the long run. And so that's going to be our differentiating factor between the short run and long run here. And so with long run production costs, there's something called returns to scale. Returns to scale are just basically what you put in, how much you're getting out. So the output or resources needed, right? The resources needed to create the final product, right? If you more than double it, well, how much is it going to increase output by? And that's returns to scales here. So the first one is increasing returns to scale, right? That's number one. So increasing returns to scale is when output more than doubles. So you put in twice the amount of resources and the final output is more than double. That's what increasing returns to scale are. Constant returns to scale is when your input doubles or the resources you're putting into making the final product doubles, but your output just doubles, right? So it's a 1-to-1 or really a 2-to-2 ratio for the constant returns to scale. And then lastly, number 3 is our decreasing returns to scale. That's when the resource or inputs you're putting into making the final product doubles, but your output less than doubles, right? And it should make sense why that's called decreasing returns to scale, because you doubled the amount of resources. However, your output or production less than doubled. And so if you notice here on our very last point on the screen, that returns to scale is only looking at production and not necessarily costs. Right? Even though we're talking about long run production costs, when we're talking about returns to scale, we're only looking at the production, right? How much the company is producing here, not necessarily how much it costs to produce the final product. And so we went over, right, in our last video, just what the short run ATC is, right? Our short run ATC is just this, right? It's basically a smiley face, a U-shaped thing. And so here, with our ATC, right, the reason why it's U-shaped is because of its relationship with the marginal cost. When marginal cost is below the ATC, right, it's going to pull the average down. And when marginal cost is above the ATC, it's going to pull that average back up. And it's the same for average short run average total cost. It's the same thing for our average variable cost also. And so here, right, that's why the marginal cost curve always intersects at the minimum point of our ATC. And so if we're going back to our long run ATC is just a bunch of short run ATCs all added up together. All right, and so what does that actually look like? Well, before we get there, right, we first have to talk about why economies of scales occur. Well, they occur because firms can use better mass production techniques and specialization, right? In other words, the more the firms produce, the more the output, right? Well, here they can start producing things in bulk and they can start to specialize in the production of certain goods. And so because of that, costs are going to fall and output is going to more than double or sometimes double. And so while the overall cost of producing is higher, right, the average cost of producing of each product is significantly lower, right? So for example, picture Costco. Right? Yes, what you buy at Costco may be significantly more expensive. However, the per unit price of all the stuff that you buy at Costco on bulk, right, is going to be cheaper. right? And so economies of scale occur. Just picture Costco about buying things in bulk. Well, yes, it may be more expensive with just the sticker price, but the per unit price is significantly less compared to other stores here. And so we talked about how our long run ATC is just a bunch of different short run ATCs just sort of all bunched up together. And so let's look at sort of why that's true. So an example is, for the next couple slides, we're going to be looking at the long run ATC, right? The ATCs and the marginal cost curve they see on the screen are just a bunch of different short run ATCs here. So we said the first return to scale is really economies of scale. And so what economies of scale are, is just when the long run ATC falls because mass production techniques are used. Right? And so if you notice here, right, what is happening to our ATC? Well, we could just take a look at that minimum points here, right? Our ATC is actually falling the more output is being produced, right? And this right here should be output. Right? And so the example that we're going to use over the next couple of slides is a restaurant. Right? If you have a really successful restaurant, it is in your best interest to open up more restaurants, because at that point, you can buy resources more in bulk, which would cause you to save a bunch of money. And so yes, while the sticker price while the actual cost of running the business is increasing, but the average per unit price of all these different resources are falling and falling and falling. And so when our short run ATCs are decreasing, we're going to say that is economies of scale because of mass production techniques. Then we get to a point called constant returns to scale. And so if you notice, right, for constant returns to scale, right, we're not increasing or decreasing, right? We're at the minimum point of our long run ATC. And that's basically it, right? If we're looking back at our restaurant example, there comes a point where prices cannot get any lower, right? The price or the cost of all these different resources can't get any lower. And so because of that, you hit that minimum point. And once you hit that minimum point, that is the constant returns to scale. And so obviously, right, the next part is just when our long run ATC starts to increase again. Well, here it's just when companies, when they're increasing in size and range, right, all of a sudden the firm gets too big and difficult to manage. There are unforeseen costs. For example, right, you have to hire more managers, right, you have to hire more workers. There's a lot of unforeseen costs, which causes our short run ATC to increase and increase and increase, as we see on the screen. And so here, where is our long run cost? Well, our long run cost is just all three of these added together: the economies of scale, the constant return scale, and diseconomies of scale, right? We have a downward sloping economies of scale, a static constant returns of scale, and an upward sloping economies of scale. So in other words, it's this gigantic U shape is going to be our long run average total cost curve, or our long run ATC. And so please note here, and that's why there's an extra bullet point here, the law of diminishing marginal returns does not apply in the long run. Why? Well, because there are no fixed resources, right? Part of our definition for diminishing returns is the fact that we add more variable resources to fixed resources, right? It's just the idea that we have too many cooks in the kitchen. But if all of our costs and all of our resources are variable resources, well, we're not adding variable to fixed, we're adding variable to variable resources, which means there are no diminishing returns. However, there comes a point where we get diseconomies of scale where our costs start to go back up. All right, and so the practice AP questions we're going to do in class, so there's not going to be another video on these practice AP questions, so pay attention in class if you don't understand the 3 practice AP questions that follows. All right, guys, I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.